Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory. It's not going to sound related, but it is. Something for sure is happening to our minds. And as I keep saying, Roger Penrose, like he's a Nobel Prize winning scientist who has definitively proven that our brains are attached to not just Newtonian physics that we think we're living in, but to more of a quantum physics, two different kinds of physics. And this should be the beginning. This is the greatest breakthrough in brain science ever. And, research dollars should be pouring into this to what he's discovered. And instead it is completely off the radar, almost completely off the radar, which is sus, very sus. But so back when I turned 40, around 40, and now mind you, I've always been a growth-oriented person, and I've always been someone who is very focused on living in reality, however difficult reality might be, which is pretty much the most important goal of therapy, right? Is to have the strength to see reality, to get through your own blind spots, demons, whatever, filters, and see reality. So I had a lot of therapy. But it wasn't just that. I was also a meditator. I was a Buddhist practitioner, and I was frequently meditating. Meditating is also a way to strengthen and train our minds, because what meditation teaches you to do is to be an observer of your own thoughts. So you become, the more you train your mind, the more you become an observer of how your thoughts flow and what happens to your thoughts and what are your thoughts. It's a scientific approach to being yourself. And it's very strengthening to your mind. I recommend it for all of you. So, and in addition to those things, I live in the Bay Area, and there are many, many, many sort of esoteric practices and, things that touch on sort of ancient ways, shamanic practices, and so forth, that I was also very interested in. What is that? How can that help me be a growth-oriented person, see reality better, etc.? So I participated in quite a few of these different kinds of esoteric practices. One in particular was very powerful, and I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, so right around when I was 40, I started to have these very extreme and strange experiences, and very uncomfortable and creepy. And I didn't know what was happening. But I'm not the kind of person to just let things like that go. I'm like, what the fuck's happening? So I was already seeing off and on a psychiatrist for I was incredibly sad in my life. My husband was an awful husband. I wasn't doing what I wanted to be doing. My life, I was trapped in slavery, in marriage, and not really able to pursue my own ambitions. So I was really sad. And so I was seeing a psychiatrist just to help me figure out what to do about that, which is really just so many things, right? I'm still very sad and trapped, but just in a different way. And so many women are. Anyway, and also when this started happening, I started going to see that this spiritual esoteric practice that I was doing in Marin. There was one of the women who led that was an indigenous shaman, and also had gone to my school where I'd gotten my master's and had gotten her master's in psychotherapy. So she was really super bright, super interesting. So I started going to her and being like, because it seems it was off the playing field, right? What was happening to me was not within the framework of just about anything. And except maybe these indigenous practices or who knows what. So I started going to her, and we would talk about what was happening to me, and actually to her brother. So her brother, and this family, her family had been indigenous shamans for generation after generation. They're obviously very gifted and talented in whatever that was, right? Telepathy or spiritual, who knows? What are the words for that? And so they had diagnosed her brother as a schizophrenic, which so pissed her off and frustrated because she knows that, of course, that's not correct. They have a family long history of connecting to spiritual or something else in the realm, and he had, this was happening for him but out of his control, and it was really horrifying and terrifying, and he had been misdiagnosed. So we talked about him, we talked about what might be happening with him, what we could do about him, and then she sent me, this is where it gets really interesting, she sent me to this woman in Marin. And the whole thing was kind of an adventure. So I drove deep into the woods of Marin and found this home hidden, like way off the main road. And there was a couple living there, and this woman who was talking to me about how she's connected to these off-world beings, and how there's all this history and off-world stuff that impacts us as humanity. Now, I am not a woo-woo person. I wasn't a woo-woo person. I'm still really not a woo-woo person. Like, that stuff would have been, like, sort of in my woo-woo circle. Like, I would have been like, oh, that's nice. But at this point, I didn't know what was going on, and I'm open to whatever, to figure out what it is and to stop it. So she tells me that there's, like, that we are being impacted by these other dimensional beings, and there's a whole other history, and humanity is playing some kind of role. And then she had me spend the night at her house, and she gave me a stack of books, which were a series that I had never heard of or seen before or after. And it was all about how this male god had obliterated the mother god early on in creation. And I just remember lying in bed exhausted because I'm way outside my comfort zone, and I'd driven a long way, and I'm just way outside my comfort zone mentally in every way. And I'm trying to read this book, which, I mean, there are 4 of them. I was just flipping through them, trying to read it. And it was like, it was written as if someone was on an acid trip or something. It was not logically laid out. And it was all about how the father god had obliterated the mother god early in creation. And that, anyway, and just, these are what the books were about. And I mean, I was really just able to flip through them before I just passed out in the bed. And the next day she talked to me and she said, what's happening is that because the feminine, the divine feminine, was destroyed by the Father God early on, all of us in creation, all the women in creation are healing this wound that happened to our Holy Mother. Yeah. And this was way before, all this other stuff that happened to me. No, not way before, but before. And it was, this is the first time I've heard anything like that. And I was just like, wow, okay. Maybe that's why is that happening to me? And she said, well, most likely you're a very, attuned mother, which makes sense considering all the work I had done previously in my life to be attuned, right? To be connected, to be a good mother, to be a good human being. Not realizing anything about, the Father God obliterating, nothing, I didn't know anything about that. So, I did have like a Jewish tradition, which is that we say that the tree of the vase of life, the tree of life has been shattered here, right? This is Kabbalah. And that we are living in a shattered world. So that I could connect to. But this was something different. And she just said that, like, the strongest women on our planet are, whether they know it or not, taking on the healing of the mother, the healing of this horrifically victimized mother by the father. So I left there. I drove home. Oh, and she did some kind of ritual. That's right. She did some kind of ritual with like a candle and she's like, okay, that's it. You're never going to have problems like this. You're never going to have problems like this again. That's the end of it. Even then, I was like, I really don't think, considering the severity of the issues I'm facing, I don't think a little candle ritual is going to change much. And it didn't change anything, really. But it was really interesting what she had to say. I'd never heard that before, and certainly my life since really bears that out. And then, I was seeing a psychiatrist, because I'm a scientist, and I needed to figure out, what was happening to me didn't fit into any, except one really, any diagnosis. It just didn't fit. And so me and this doctor, who was wonderful, were trying to figure out, what's going on, because what's happening to me doesn't fit any diagnosis. Until we really just landed on spiritual emergence, which is a diagnosis in DSM, and we don't really know much about what that is. We know we're learning more and more, but it basically means that something is happening to us beyond our comprehension, to our minds, where we're connecting with spiritual beings or some other realm. And so we have it in our DMS, which is our only kind of tool for diagnosing quote unquote mental illness. But we really don't know much about it. We don't know what it is. And I think so. It took us a while to kind of just firmly land on that, because both of us are fairly scientific people, and it was off the playing field what was happening to me. And this diagnosis is about, we're connecting to something off the playing field, right? And human beings have connected to that forever, right? We've connected to this other realm. But it's hard to use that as a mental illness diagnosis, right? That's it's not really. I mean, we have it in the DSM to try and explain symptoms that just don't make sense otherwise. That's why it's there.